Hi, anatomy students, and welcome to Chapter 4. This chapter will be all on tissues, which will serve as a big help as you're studying for your lab exam, because we'll be going over a lot of the different tissue types that you need to learn for your lab exam and how to recognize the various tissues in the body. There's about 150 slides to this lecture, so I am going to take some things out. You're responsible for the information, but I'm going to try to highlight what I want you to focus on. So our cells work together, we learned about that last chapter, in functionally related groups called tissues. And a group of cells of similar structure that performs a common function is a tissue. And these are the four basic types of tissue, which you should be very familiar with. You should know what they do, what their subtypes are. You should know how to identify them and what they look like underneath a microscope. We have epithelial tissue that covers, connective tissue that supports, muscle tissue to help with movement in the body, and nervous tissue to help with control. So epithelial tissue covers a body surface or lines a body cavity. It forms parts of glands, and the functions of epithelial tissue are to protect, secrete substances, absorb, diffuse things through them, filter things, as well as sensory reception. We have sensory receptors in your skin. All cells or special characteristics of epithelial tissue are that they are highly made of cells. So we have this cellularity function or characteristic where there's lots of cells in epithelial tissue and not a lot of other stuff. There's specialized contacts where cells are joined by special junctions. And also the cells in these tissues have a polarity, which means there's a region on the apical surface that's exposed to either the exterior or interior environment, and also a basal surface that's attached to an underlying tissue called the basement membrane below it. Epithelial tissue is supported by connective tissue. It's avascular but innervated. So what that means is that epithelial cells do not have blood vessels. They are nerves in them, but they don't have blood vessels in them. So they receive their nutrients from underlying connective tissue. And epithelial cells have the ability to regenerate. Their lost cells are quickly replaced by cell division. So this is a look at some of the special characteristics of epithelial tissue. So this layer is epithelial tissue. They're connected by special junctions. They could have special microvilli or cilia associated with them. There's an apical surface, which is always exposed, and a basal surface that's attached to an area called the basement membrane that kind of anchors the epithelial tissue down. There's different cell junctions, and epithelial tissue is made up mostly of cells. How we classify and name epithelial tissue is based on the number of cell layers and also the shape of the cells. So the first name of the tissue indicates the number of cell layers, and single epithelial has a single layer of cells attached to a basement membrane, and stratified epithelial has multiple layers of cells, where the basal layer of the cells is attached to the basement membrane. Then we can classify the name by the shape of their cells. The cells can be squamous, where they're very flat. They can be cuboidal, shaped like a cube, or columnar, shaped like a column. So here's an example of a simple squamous epithelium because it's one layer versus stratified squamous epithelium because it's multiple layers. You can see in this stratified example how the cell layers near the basal surface are more cuboidal in shape, and the cells near the surface are flat or squamous shaped. So how do we know? Do we call this cuboidal or squamous? Well, we always classify the epithelial on the base of the cells in the apical surface. So this is a stratified squamous epithelium. And here are the different shapes of the cells that will help give it their names. So here's a look at the function of epithelial tissue relative to its tissue type. So if we have a squamous, a one layer, simple squamous epithelium is important for diffusion because things can get through it easily, as well as filtration. And if we have more than one layer of stratified squamous, that usually helps to function in protection. Simple cuboidal helps with secretion and absorption. There might be cilia on them, which propel mucus or reproductive cells. And stratified cuboidal help in protection. Transitional is a specific special type of epithelium that helps in protection and is able to stretch to accommodate the stretching of urinary structures. So simple squamous, now we're going to go through each relatively quickly but feel free to use this PowerPoint as you're filling out your lab packet and as you're studying for lab as well. So simple squamous epithelium is a single layer of flat cells, and the function is that materials can pass through easily through passive diffusion and filtration. It can also secrete lubricating substances in the serosae. It's located in your kidney glomeruli, where filtration of your blood is happening, the air sacs of the lungs, where carbon dioxide and oxygen are being diffused, the lining of the heart, blood, lymphatic vessels, and the lining of the ventral body cavity. So here's a look at simple squamous, a single layer of flat-like cells. You can see the darker circle is the nucleus. So these are great snapshots of what the epithelial tissue is and where it's located, which are two things you'll need to know both for lecture and for lab. Simple cuboidal is a single layer of cube-like cells where the nucleus is right in the center. The function, they work to secrete and absorb substances. So we'll find them in your kidney tubules and the secretory portions of small glands and the ovary surface. So here we see simple cuboidal, and it's wrapped around an empty space called a lumen. And depending on how the tissue is cut, it might give us kind of a more transverse section or a longitudinal section. But this is a single layer of cuboidal shaped cells, kind of wrapped in a circle because there's a lumen or a hollow space that goes through it. And this is simple cuboid. Simple columnar is a single layer of column-shaped cells with round to oval nuclei. Some may bear cilia at their apical or exposed surface. They may contain goblet cells, which mucus. So this type of epithelial tissue functions in absorption, secretion of mucus, enzymes, and other substances. And the ciliated type propels mucus or reproductive cells by ciliary action. The non-ciliated form lines your digestive tract, the gallbladder, and ducts of some glands, and the ciliated form can line some of the small bronchi in the lungs, the uterine tubes, and the uterus. So here's a look at simple columnar epithelium. We have microvilli on the surface. This is a big goblet cell with mucus in it. And the non-ciliated version, which is what you're looking at, you can see a column-shaped cell with an oval-shaped nucleus. This is located in the digestive tract. Pseudostratified columnar is one of our specialized types of epithelium, where all cells will originate at the basement membrane. Only the tall cells reach the apical surface. They may contain goblet cells and bear cilia, and the nuclei can lie at varying heights within the cells. And this gives a false impression of stratification, and that's why we call it pseudostratified. The function is to secrete mucus, propel mucus along by cilia. The locations are the non-ciliated type, the ducts of male reproductive tubes, ducts of large glands, and the ciliated type lines parts of your respiratory tract, the trachea, and most of your upper respiratory tract. So here's a beautiful look at pseudostratified cilia. So you can see the cilia. The pseudostratified look like fake layers at nuclei at varying heights. You see large goblet cells containing nucleus. And an example of this is located in your trachea or respiratory tract. The goblet cells create mucus, which traps anything harmful you breathe in. Stratified then, epithelia have two or more layers. They will regenerate from below. The major role is protection, and they're always named according to the shape of their cells at the apical layer. A description is many layers of the cells are squamous in shape. So we're looking at stratified squamous, many layers of flat squamous shaped cells. The deeper layers of cells appear cuboidal or columnar, and this is the thickest type of epithelial. We can have keratinized or non-keratinized. Keratinized stratified squamous is located in your epidermis, which is the surface of your skin. It contains the protective protein keratin. It's waterproof, and the surface cells are dead, and they're filled with keratin, which is this protective protein. And non-keratinized stratified squamous forms the moist lining of body openings or exitings, and the cells at the apical surface will be alive. So we have stratified squamous, protects underlying tissue. In the keratinized version, it will be located in the epidermis or the skin, and the non-keratinized version forms the lining of mucous membranes in the locations listed below. So here's a look at non-keratinized stratified squamous. And we know this is non-keratinized because the cells in the most apical surface layers have nuclei in them. Those are those little circles. So that means they're alive. So this is stratified squamous, non-keratinized. Stratified cuboidal has 2 layers of cube-shaped cells, function to protect, and it forms the ducts of mammary glands, salivary glands, and the largest sweat glands. So here's a look at a double layer of cuboidal cells. So this is stratified cuboidal found in a salivary gland. Stratified columnar has several layers where the basal cells are usually cuboidal and the superficial cells are elongated. The function of stratified columnar is to help in protection and secretion. And this is a very rare tissue type. We can find it in the male urethra and large ducts of some glands. So here's a look at a stratified columnar epithelium found in the male urethra. Transitional epithelium is one of our specialized types. It looks kind of stratified cuboidal, stratified squamous, but the superficial cells are dome-shaped or balloon-shaped when the bladder is relaxed, and they're squamous or flat and stretched when the bladder is full. This type of epithelial can permit distension of urinary organs when they're filled with urine. They're located in the epithelium of the urinary bladder, the ureters, and the proximal urethra. So here's transitional epithelium, and it kind of looks like this apical cells are balloon shaped because they can become flat when the bladder is stretched, and they retain their shape when the bladder is empty. Endocrine glands, I'm going to skip over, but you should know endocrine glands. You're responsible for this information, but this is one part that you guys can kind of review on your own. So I am going to briefly pass over the endocrine glands and let you guys read those on your own. I'm also going to briefly pass over how these cells are joined together. You are responsible for this information, but I want to focus on specifically tissue types that will relate to lab as well. So feel free to study these slides on your own. And this takes us through some epithelial surface features. We have microvilli, which help for absorption, cilia, which help to move things across, and connective tissue. So this type of tissue in the body, it's the most diverse and abundant. There's the main classes of connective tissue are connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. And the important functions of connective tissue are to form the skeleton, store and carry nutrients, surround blood vessels and nerves, and lead the fight against infection. Some characteristics of epithelial tissue is of connective tissue. Unlike epithelial tissue, which is what we just talked about, connective tissue does not have a lot of cells. We have a lot of extracellular matrix that's made up of ground substance, fibers. It's produced by the cells of the connective tissue. And there's a common embryonic origin, which is called mesenchyme, which will go on and differentiate into the different types of connective tissue. There are differences in the types of cells and differences in the composition of the extracellular matrix, but in general, connective tissues all share structural elements. The cells can be fibroblasts, which make protein subunits. These will be found in connective tissue proper. We have chondroblasts, which secrete matrix in cartilage, and osteoblasts secrete matrix in bone. The cells in the blood are an exception. They do not produce the plasma matrix of the blood. Many other important cell types can be found in connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue has fat cells, white blood cells, and mast cells. The different fibers that we can have in connective tissue in the extracellular matrix, fibers are helpful to support and also have very unique properties. We can have collagen fibers, which are the strongest, reticular fibers, which are bundles of a special type of collagen, and then elastic fibers contain elastin, which can recoil after stretching. The ground substance then of connective tissue is produced by the primary cell type. It's usually gel-like of glycans and glycosaminoglycans. It helps to cushion and protect your body structures. It holds all the tissue together as fluid. Blood is an exception because the plasma is not produced by blood cells. So we're going to go through these connective tissues now. This chart is a great look at the 4 basic classes of connective tissue: the connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. And then we'll go over each one in a little more detail. So connective tissue proper, really simply put, can be loose or dense. We'll go over areolar, adipose, reticular, and then dense, irregular, dense, regular, and elastic. Embryonic connective tissue is mesenchyme, and this just talks about how all connective tissues will get their start from mesenchyme in the embryo, and then it will go on and differentiate into all the other types of connective tissue. So this is connective tissue embryonic, and this is what mesenchyme looks like and how it will give rise to all other connective tissue types. All right, so a detailed discussion of areolar connective tissue will help you understand the properties of other connective tissues. It has many structural components common to other connective tissues types. So we call it the model connective tissue. So areolar connective tissue can have ground substance, which is the filler, and fibers. And again, fibers and ground substance make up the extracellular matrix. We can have different fiber types. The collagen fibers are the largest, going down to reticular fibers, which are the smallest. We can have blood capillaries going through, so they are vascular. We can have fat cells, mast cells, which will help with the inflammation response, neutrophils, fibroblasts, macrophages, which engulf or eat anything foreign, and then lymphocytes. So areolar connective tissue underlines epithelial tissue. It borders all other tissues in the bodies. It supports and binds tissues. We'll go over the different fibers in the 3 types of protein fibers, which can be in the extracellular matrix, and fibroblasts are the cells that always produce these fibers. So areolar is a gel-like matrix. It has lots of different cells in it, and it functions to wrap and cushion organs, and it plays an important role in inflammation. It's widely distributed under the epithelial. It packages organs and it surrounds capillaries. So here's loose areolar, lots of free space. It's very loose, lots of extracellular matrix. You can look at the fibers, you can see the ground substance and the fibroblasts with their nuclei shown there. There can be a tissue fluid, which has more watery fluid in it, or the ground substance will be made and secreted by the fibroblasts. Your areolar helps to fight against infection because it has lots of different white blood cells and other types of cells to help gather at infection sites. Adipose tissue then is another type of connective tissue. It's created of adipocytes, and it has a nucleus pushed off to one side by a fat droplet. It's highly vascularized. It functions to provide reserve food fuel. It insulates against heat loss. It supports and protects organs. It's located under your skin, around kidneys, behind walls. So here's a look at adipose tissue. The nucleus is pushed off to the side. The fat droplet fills up the entire cell. So it looks empty, but you're looking at fat droplets filling up the entire cell. Brown adipose tissue produces heat, and it occurs in babies to aid in thermoregulation. Reticular connective tissue has a rich network of reticular fibers to help form a soft internal skeleton or stroma. And we find reticular connective tissue in your lymph nodes, your bone marrow, and your spleen. So here's a look at reticular tissue. You can see the reticular fibers, and you'll find it making up some lymphoid organs and the spleen. Then we have dense connective tissue. There's 3 types: dense irregular, dense regular, and then elastic connective tissue. Dense connective tissues resist strong pulling forces, and they have much more collagen. Dense irregular has the fibers thick and irregularly arranged. The function is to withstand tension and provide structural strength. So we'll find it in the dermis of your skin, some digestive tract, the fibrous capsules, around some of the other organs. So this is dense irregular connective tissue with irregular bundles of collagen going every which way. Dense regular connective tissue, we have collagen fibers in parallel. We have few elastic fibers, great tensile strength, poorly vascularized. The function is to attach muscle to bone as a tendon, or bone to bone as a ligament. So this is what dense regular connective tissue looks like: very parallel arranged collagen fibers. Elastic connective tissue has elastic fibers. It allows for coil after restretching. We'll find it within the walls of arteries, some ligaments. So this is what elastic tissue, connective tissue looks like. And I think it looks like lasagna. And I'm really bad at writing on here, but if you can remember elastic tissue lasagna. That's what I think it looks like. It's able to stretch and recoil, so we'll find it in the walls of major blood vessels. Cartilage then have similar structural components. Chondroblasts are the immature cartilage cells that secrete matrix during cartilage growth. And we have three types of cartilage. Each cartilage has special functions. Hyaline cartilage has a glassy appearance. We have chondroblasts and chondrocytes. It supports and reinforces. It helps to cushion. It resists repetitive stress. It's located in the fetal skeleton, the ends of long bones, the costal cartilage of the ribs, and the cartilage of your nose, the trachea, and the larynx. So here's hyaline cartilage. Not many fibers are seen. It has a glossy appearance, and you can see the chondrocytes sitting in the lacuna, which is the space that houses them. Elastic cartilage is similar to hyaline, but it has much more elastic fibers. That's the big thing to keep out. It helps to maintain shape, allows great flexibility. It supports your external ear and also your epiglottis. So you look at elastic cartilage, more elastic fibers. This is what makes up your outer ear. Fibrocartilage then has a matrix similar but less firm, has thick collagen fibers predominating. The functions are strength and the ability to absorb compressive shock. So we'll find fibrocartilage in your intervertebral discs, the pubic symphysis, which connects your pubic bones together, and the discs of the knee joint. So here is fibrocartilage. Bone has inorganic calcium salts, osteoblasts, and osteocytes. It's well vascularized, and this is your bone makes up the bones of your skeleton. It also stores fat. It's the site for blood cell formation. It stores calcium and other minerals, and it provides a lever for attachment of muscles. So it helps to move your body. And this is bone. What you're looking at, these black parts are the osteocytes, the bone cells, and we'll go over bone in a little more detail when we get to the skeletal system. The central canal contains the blood vessels, and we have lamella, which are kind of the rings that go around the central canal. So this is bone. Here is blood now. So blood is an atypical connective tissue. It develops from mesenchyme. It consists of cells surrounded by non-living matrix. Red and white blood cells are in the fluid matrix, and the function is to transport respiratory gases, nutrients, and wastes. Blood is located within all your vessels. As you're looking at, these are typical red blood cells called erythrocytes. Anything stained a little darker will be a white blood cell, and you have 5 different types of white blood cells, so sometimes they'll look different. The plasma is what fills up the other parts, and then normally you have platelets, which are also small, just dots in the blood smear that help clot. So here's the structure and tissue provided, clues to its location and function to give you an idea of how to name these. This is a great slide to help you study how to identify these different tissue types. So I would pause it here and read through these slides well. Covering and lining of membranes. I'm going to have you guys review the covering and lining of membranes. There's a cutaneous membrane in our body, mucous membranes, and serous membranes. And I'll let you guys review those 3 types on your own, because I want to try to finish within a couple minutes within muscle tissue and nervous tissue. Muscle tissue has muscle cells called muscle fibers, which contain myofilaments, which will be actin and myosin to help with contraction. There's 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal has this description: many nuclei, long, cylindrical, obvious striations. We control skeletal muscle, so it's called voluntary. Facial expression, manipulation of movement. It's located in all your skeletal muscles attached to bones or skin. And this is what skeletal muscle looks like. Multinucleate, it has those zebra stripes to it, so it's striated. And it's voluntary, meaning we control our muscle movement. Cardiac muscle is more branched, kind of like a Y, generally one nucleus, and the cells are interdigitate, meaning they're connected with these intercalated discs. The cardiac muscle contracts to propel blood into your circulatory system. It's located in the walls of the heart. And this is what cardiac muscle looks like. Here's your intercalated discs. You can see that it's more branching. It still has some striations, but we see obvious Y-shaped branches to it. Smooth muscle has no striations, cardiac muscle, I should say, is involuntary, meaning your heart beats on its own. Smooth muscle has spindle-shaped cells, central nuclei, no striation. It forms in the walls of hollow organs. It propels substances along passageways, involuntary control. So here is smooth muscle, involuntary, found in most of the walls of hollow organs. Nervous tissue then makes up our brain, spinal cord, and nerves. It's made up of neurons and neural glia, which are supporting cells that nourish, insulate, and protect the neurons. Your nervous tissue functions to transmit electrical signals. It's located in the brain and spinal cord. Here's a look at nervous tissue. Here's a cell body, neuron processes. The neuron processes are mainly the axon, which is long, and the dendrites are the small processes coming off of the cell body. Tissue response to injury. I'm also going to let you guys finish up this chapter on your own, looking at what inflammation is and why that's important, because it's your body's way of fighting off an infection. Edema is accumulation of fluid, also a part of inflammation. And then we'll look at repair of all the tissue types, and I'll let you read how your bodies can repair tissue of a skinned wound. Tissues throughout life change a little bit, going from the embryo to adulthood. And you guys can see here a little bit how embryonic germ layers will change into the various tissue types that'll be formed. These will be good to excellent is epithelial tissue and the ability to regenerate itself. Moderate isn't able to regenerate itself as much. And none or almost no regenerative capacity is cardiac muscle tissue and nervous tissue. So when these cells die, they basically do not regenerate themselves. As your tissues change throughout life, things happen. Epithelial thins, collagen decreases, muscles, bones, and nervous tissue begins to atrophy, and poor nutrition and poor circulation lead to poor health of tissues. Thanks for listening to chapter 4, guys, and I'll see you for chapter 5.